everyone, and welcome back to Simply Renee at Sunday Reads with Renee. My name is Renee, and today I'm going to be focusing more on the Harlem Renaissance literature. Just 5 books that I recommend for Harlem Renaissance literature that I think are very good and you should give a opportunity to read if you haven't yet, because I think all 5 of these books are good and there's a lot to dissect, discuss, and unpack. For those of you who are not familiar with the Harlem Renaissance, it was this huge cultural movement in the 1920s, specifically, where you had a lot of African American progress in terms of culture, arts, music, literature, and other different types of activism as well that took place in Harlem, New York. And it's a very interesting time because I relate to it more with jazz because that's where my love of jazz came from, mostly thanks to Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, and Ella Fitzgerald. But I do like the Harlem Renaissance, and it's something that I hope to do more of a deep dive into on this channel, especially with Sunday Reads, because this is the part where you see a lot of literature coming out from that era that's very interesting and different. And I hope to do more deep dives on it. But today I'm just going to focus more on 5 books that I recommend for you to read if you haven't yet, or maybe you have read it and want to open your eyes to rereading it more, learn a few more things as well, because I think all 5 of these novels, again, are something you can discuss a lot about and dissect. Before I begin, I just wanted to give you a brief update on my winter reads for 2025, and here it is. So as you can see, I finished as of now 15 of 30 books, which I'm very happy about. So I still got a month to go. So it's a little bit of crunch time for me. But I am looking forward to giving more reactionary videos to it this week through shorts. I haven't done that in a while because everything's been so busy. So I'm going to work on that this week and present it to you just so you can get an idea of what I'm doing. I was originally going to do it with just newer novels, but I think I'm just going to do it with the whole novels that I read, whether they're newly published as of 2025 or if they've been published 10, 15 years ago, because I like reading and I want to bring this to everyone's attention if they haven't read these books yet, or they have and they want to give it a little bit more of a reread. But as of now, the winter reads of 2026 are doing very well, 15 of 30 books. So getting it all done this week as well as into next month. We'll see how it goes. Also, before I begin with these 5 books, I will not be including Their Eyes Were Watching God because that is a book I'm already reading right now that I want to give more of my own assessments to, but I do recommend it because it is an excellent book. I've only read chapter 1 so far, and I've reread it years ago, so I'm really enjoying it right now, and I look forward to giving a reactionary take on that in a short in the future. Also, before I begin, I just want to let everyone know that I will be revealing plot details, so therefore spoilers are ahead, and I'm also going to be using alternative words and phrases because of YouTube rules and regulations. The first one is Cain by Jean Toomer, and this is an interesting book because it's a mixture of different types of perspectives from the Southern and Northern cultures and experiences of African Americans during that time period of the 1920s and even before. And it's an interesting book in the fact that it's more of a short story cycle. So it has a mixture of vignettes, one play, as well as some poems and a couple little short story type atmosphere. And I did overall like it. I thought it was very interesting. It has some good stories that you can really gravitate to and have a lot to discuss, dissect, and really think about a lot in a lot of terms. And one thing that I did find interesting about Cain is that the poems were a little more appealing to me. I'm not a huge fan of poetry, but I did like the poems overall. And I think that's just where Jean Toomer happened to have more of his skill set with. And it doesn't surprise me in a way because when I did some research on the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of authors and writers at this point in time were more poetry than anything else. At least that's from the perspective I've done with the research. And you can really see it flow in this book, Cain. And I think the poems are very excellent, and I enjoyed them and gravitated to them a lot more, even though I'm not a huge poetry fan. That's just how I felt when I read the book. And what I also like is that some of the short stories were pretty good. You got to see a lot of different perspectives. In the first section, it was more from Southern culture and folklore and perspectives, where I found some very interesting ones like Becky and Esther, which really does focus from a female perspective and mixed race, as well as love and relationships. And I also did like the second section where they have a lot of interesting stories to it as well that deal with love, relationships, racial conflicts as well. And that came more from the Northern perspective and culture. And the play version, which takes place in the third section, was very interesting. It really does focus heavily on racial conflicts. And I like all of that within the book because I think it was interesting to give all different types of perspectives of different regions, African American experiences, and get all that out there in this book. Overall, I liked Kane. I thought it was something that has a lot of topics that you can really discuss and dissect. And I hope to do more of a deeper dive into it with some additional researches because I think it would make an interesting segment here for the Sunday Reads with Renee section. So I hope to do that more in the future as I go ahead in this channel. And I do overall recommend it because I think it's something that you can really read, discuss, dissect, and truly think about. Home to Harlem by Claude McKay is an interesting book. It was published in 1927, and it's more of what I recall a love letter to Harlem. And it's also a personal journey to the main character, Jake. And Jake is an interesting character. He is a black man who was enlisting in World War I, hoping to fight for the country, but then deserted it completely when he found that he could only be a menial laborer, which is not something that he wanted to do and what he expected when he joined into the war service. And so he completely deserted the war, then traveled to London for a short period of time, and then decided to return to Harlem. And he is really excited to be there. He ends up really enjoying the nightlife and feeling pretty good about being there. There's a lot of interesting things that he goes through in the Harlem underworld that includes addictions and crime and illegal activities. Yet he also ends up reconnecting with an old war friend named Zeddy, and he finds love with a woman who ends up disappearing from his life unexpectedly. And while he tries to move on from her, he finds he really can't. So it's an interesting journey that Jake goes through of just living in Harlem, moving to different areas as well, and just trying to find himself with identity and culture, where he belongs, and also more about who he is. So it's actually quite a personal journey in addition to being a love letter to Harlem. And what's interesting about this book is that it does show the gritty realism of Harlem, where even though it's this great place of culture, transformation, blues, jazz, and nightlife, it also has a lot of things to it that have more of a gritty realism, such as crime, illegal activities, and addictions that I think were nicely highlighted in a lot of ways. The only thing about Home to Harlem that I don't really like too much is that from my perspective, I thought it could have been written a little bit better in some ways, but I overall liked it in general. I think it was a quick read that you can really gravitate to and get through within a day or just a few hours. And it's something that gives you a lot to dissect and think about. And I overall liked the character of Jake. I thought he was very interesting, and seeing his journey unfold was pretty good. The other thing, too, in this book that I think was interesting is that it was written in 1927. So some of the language there is not something that I personally liked, just a little bit of the language. But because it was published in 1927, I'm not surprised because a lot of books that I read from this time period do have a different set of language that were just common at the time. So overall, I recommend Home to Harlem for your reading because it is an interesting book and it can get you interested in Claude McKay if you haven't already read him. The next one is The Blacker the Berry by Wallace Thurman. And this was a very interesting one that I hope to do more of a deep dive on because I think there's a lot of layers to it and a lot of discussion that you can take from it. It's all about a young woman named Emma Lou who lives in Boise, Idaho, and she has a lot of struggles with her mixed race identity. She's a woman who lives in Boise, Idaho, and but she's the only Black student at her school, so she has struggles fitting in with her classmates who are white, but she also has struggles fitting in with her family because she has a darker skin tone despite being in a mixed race family, whereas her mother, grandmother, and uncle have lighter skin tones. So it's tough for her to even fit in with her family because they would prefer her to have lighter skin tone and are quite upfront about it. And they even want to see her try and get her lighter skin tone through bleaches and creams, which don't work out. She doesn't really want that either. And so her uncle suggests that she go to school in Los Angeles so that way she can have an education, but also maybe try and find her own personal journey and identity. And so Emma Lou goes there and she's hoping for better things along the way. However, when Emma Lou arrives in Los Angeles, she finds it a struggle as well. Even though she starts to have a romantic relationship with someone, she still finds a lot of struggles fitting in because of her skin tone. There are some people that still prefer light skin tones as superior to the darker ones. She has trouble fitting in with people who don't consider her to be fit in any particular box because of her mixed race identity as well. And then she eventually goes to Harlem and she keeps going on these personal journeys while struggling with colorism, her own struggles with identity and work and career and relationships. So it's actually a very full, well rounded book that will take a long time to discuss because I find it very interesting and well written. I think Wallace Thurman really does well to show the complexities of it from the 1920s perspective. And it's interesting about Thurman himself because one of the reasons I read about why he wrote this book is because he felt that the early works of the Harlem Renaissance didn't really focus on all the complexities of African Americans. He felt that there was more works being published and distributed to the masses that showed African Americans as moral, upstanding people and not in a different way or in a mixture of how they have complexities and flaws and aren't always up to morally standards as well. So he really wanted to focus more on the complexities and the difficulties of that society. But he also wanted to really focus on the things that he experienced in his own culture and his society as well, because he saw mixed race people as struggling to fit in with their identities, especially in the 1920s, because of everything that was going on. But also, he also wanted to focus on how having darker skin tones for women made it very difficult. And I found that interesting because we're still having those discussions in 2026 from all the social media I see of people who do talk about this because they come from mixed race backgrounds and how they have struggles with that as well, even biracial people. And it's very interesting to see people discuss this on social media, even in 2026, and also how it was back in the 1920s as I read this book in The Black or the Berry. But overall, I think this is an excellent book. It's very well written. It gets to the heart of the complexities of society from the African American perspective. And I also enjoyed seeing Emma Lou's journey. I think she has an interesting personal journey as she tries to go through different phases in life and struggles with relationships and her own identity. So when they get to the conclusion, I felt it was satisfying and worked very well. So I think this was overall a good book and I recommend, and I hope to do more of a better review and a deeper dive into it. So this is something I recommend from the Harlem Renaissance that I think is a very interesting one that I really enjoyed. The next one is The Conjure Man D Word by Rudolph Fisher. And this is a big time novel because it's been touted as very groundbreaking in its day when published in 1932 because it's the first detective novel with a black detective and has primarily black characters throughout the whole book. And it is a very well written book with some twists and turns and a good mystery. It's all about a detective named Perry Dart who is trying to investigate the violent elimination of a man named Frimbo, who was a fortune teller. And he's assisted by a Dr. John Archer. And so they both work together to really try and investigate this crime and find the perpetrator or perpetrators who did it. And it's a very good mystery. I thought it had some nice twists and turns. They had some interesting characters in the book that really moved the plot along. And it gets to a very good conclusion that I wasn't expecting, especially with some twists and turns. And it was an excellent work. I thought Perry Dart and Dr. John Archer made a very good team, and I would have liked to have seen more of them in different works. Unfortunately, Rudolph Fisher passed away before he could write more of those works or any other types of works, and that's very sad because he died at such a young age in his 30s. But I overall liked this work and thought it was very good with some twists and turns, and it's a very interesting mystery that I found quite appealing as it goes into more of the dark underworld of Harlem, New York, and you meet all these characters and these addictions, but also some shady activities going on. But it's really the characters in here that truly move the plot and have their own different types of personality. The only downside I saw to this novel is just that it it has some language in there that I think is just not very relevant and outdated today, but it makes sense for 1932. Even in the book version that I read of this, points this out that you're going to see some language in here that is typical of the time period, but not something we would do today. But overall, I think The Conjure Man D Word is an excellent mystery novel. It makes me wish that we could have seen more from Rudolph Fisher if he hadn't passed away at such a young age and what he could have presented to us completely. But I do recommend this one if you love mysteries, like interesting characters, and some twists and turns. Final one is Passing by Nella Larsen, and this is an excellent read, and it's a personal favorite for mine. I get drawn to this book consistently. I liked The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett so much because it had a lot of similar themes as Passing did, and I think they both handle it in different ways, of course, but with Passing, I really liked this one because it's a relatively short read that has a lot to discuss, dissect, and really take into account, as well as think about after the final page comes. And for me, this is a great book because it's, again, relatively short, but it does give a lot of discussion similar to what The Black or the Berry did. And it's all about two women named Claire and Irene. And both of them are childhood friends who lost track of each other when they were adults. And they've gone into different paths. And they're from mixed race backgrounds and could easily pass as white. But Irene chooses not to. She likes living in Harlem. She doesn't want to pass as white. And she's living contently with her husband and two children, whereas Claire chose the opposite path. She decides to pass white. She marries a rich white man who is a racist, and they have a daughter, and they're living in Europe. And then one day, Irene and Claire cross paths. They end up reconnecting and having some discussions and catching up. But Irene really doesn't want to have a relationship with Claire because Claire has chosen a different path in life. She's chosen to pass white and live with her racist husband, and she doesn't really think it's a good fit anymore because Irene wants to stay in Harlem and not pass white. So it's just not a good thing for them to be friends because they've chosen different paths in life, and that's where they want to be at this point in time. But what does happen is that Claire does actually want to reconnect with Irene. She wants to start a friendship with her and reintegrate into Harlem, New York. Irene doesn't see it as a good thing because what if her husband finds out because he's very racist, but Claire doesn't care. She wants to try. And so it starts off very easily. Irene and Claire are enjoying this reconnection and getting to know each other again, but things start to take a little bit of a toll and it ends up leading to a lot of tragic results. So overall, I do like Passing by Nella Larsen because she does bring a lot of subject matter to it that I think is still very relevant today, especially in the terms of mixed race and passing as well as class, because there are a lot of those discussions still happening today in 2026. As I mentioned earlier with The Black or the Berry, I see a lot of people on social media who discuss their experiences as mixed race biracial people and their identity. And in this case, I do think passing really did do well to bring the subject of passing there to light in the 1920s perspective, because it is something that I see when I look up a bunch of different stories about people who chose to pass as white and how that had ramifications and how it affected their lives as well. And I think it was just an interesting book. But outside of that, I did like the characters of Claire and Irene. I think they're both very interesting in the different paths they take, and they don't have any animosity to each other. There is a love and affection there, but because of the different paths they chose, they can't really ever come back in together completely as they used to. And then there's a situation in the latter half of the book where Irene thinks that Claire and her husband are having an affair with each other, and that causes a little bit of conflict, not too much, but enough for Irene to be suspicious of her husband's infidelity, possibly with Claire. Possible infidelity, mind you. And the thing that really is at the forefront, too, with Claire is that she really wants to reintegrate into the Harlem society, regardless of what her husband might find out. And Irene's like, nah, if you do this, it's going to cause some problems and issues. You know, we're in the 1920s, racism and segregation are still here. This isn't a good idea. And that ends up having some kind of conflict as well as possible tragic ramifications, which I won't reveal here in the book because I want you again to read it for yourself. But I overall liked Passing. It's a personal favorite of mine. It's very well written. And I also recommend reading Nella Larsen's book Quicksand, which is an interesting read as well. But between Quicksand and Passing, I like Passing the best. I think that was a greatly written work. It's something that I find very interesting, and you can still do a lot of discussion and dissection from it, and gives you a lot to think about. And this concludes the 5 books that I recommend that you read from the Harlem Renaissance. And these are the 5 books I like that give you a lot of discussion, dissection, interpretation, and a lot of things to think about and research. I hope I can do more deeper dives on these books as well as other novels from the Harlem Renaissance because, again, I really like that time period and enjoy it. I think it's an interesting one in terms of jazz and blues because it's a subject and type of music genre that I like, but I also really like the period in itself. And I found with some research the pros and cons of it. So I hope to do more of a deeper dive into this as the channel goes on. But these are the 5 books that I particularly like from the Harlem Renaissance and that I've read and recommend to you. And now I want to know what you think. Do you like any of these books? Do you agree with me, not agree with me? Have you read these books, reread them, or never read them at all? What do you think of the themes in them if you've read them? And anything that you'd like to say, please do so. You can always leave them in the comments as I welcome all discussions. I thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell. I'll be back next Wednesday with a different type of video, Friday with a food video, and next Sunday with another Sunday Reads with Renee video. We'll be entering March then, and I'm hoping to put up more for the theme of the month, which is Women's History Month. So you'll be seeing some different content for that and reviews. But again, I thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye.